Most people thought Marc Marquez arriving at the factory Ducati MotoGP team was bad news for Pecco Bagnaia, but this bad? We're only in mid-May and Bagnaia is not even second in the championship and he's 51 points behind Marc Marquez already. This is really pretty bleak for the man who's been leading Ducati's MotoGP charge basically since it became pretty decent again. Well, Dovi might argue about that bit. Val, we'll go through what Pecco himself thinks about what's going on and a few of the questions we've had about what's going on from the Race Members Club. But what is your gut take at the moment on Pecco's trajectory? Did you expect anything this bad? I know you, like me and like Simon, you picked Marc Marquez as title favourite, but this sort of gap?
It was within the range of outcomes. I don't think it was the one I would have called most probable. So it was just like, it's one possibility. I think we all acknowledged it as one possibility, but I think a more 70-30, 60-40 split in Marc's favor rather than this, which I would say is a 90-10, 95-5 kind of thing. I don't know. I'm saying 95-5. There has not been a single weekend or race where I felt Pecco Bagnaia has been quicker than Marc Marquez, so I can go 100-0. I think 100-0 is fair. Yeah, I think plausible, but it's not surprising that we're here necessarily, but it wasn't the likeliest outcome in my book, which maybe shows that I've underestimated Marc. It's not the smartest thing to do.
No, but I expect a lot better from Pecco Bagnaia than this. If Simon was here, we're doing this as a two-hander, me and Val, because basically Simon has been sent off to write extensively about Isle of Man TT stuff. More on that and our plans for that later. But yeah, Simon would be here saying, yeah, I knew Marc would win every single race this season because Simon's basically said that since Marc signed for Gresini. But I have a lot of faith in Bagnaia's raw speed. I have a lot of faith in everything Bagnaia's achieved for Ducati. I thought it would be closer, and I thought we don't know Marquez can turn in this sort of performance. It's been so long since he's had the opportunity to. Turns out I was emphatically wrong. There's lots of, I think, skepticism and confusion describes it well from the Race Members Club on Patreon, where after every race you can throw comments and questions at us for the podcast. If we don't get through them all in the post-race episodes, they kind of inform everything else we do, like this podcast. Keo says, I'm still curious, how can we measure how true what Bagnaia is saying is about losing front feeling? Is it just he's up against Marc, who's way better, and Alex is stronger than him on a similarly good bike? Matthias Kainz, or Matthias, sorry if I got that wrong, says, overall in the weekend, this is after the Mon weekend, is Pecco's Marc could ride a tractor and be competitive comment, coupled with Pecco's non-scores, the first proper sign of Pecco cracking under the Marquez pressure. I struggle to recall a worse weekend for him in a very, very long time. And Todd Bryant said, I feel Pecco just has to start riding this bike and stop hoping there is more to find that will mean he can match Marc. He's just not quite as good as Marc, but he'd have more success if he just accepted he must work with what he has underneath him. Val, what's your take on how Pecco's trying to deal with this pace deficit in terms of the things he's trying on the bike and his attitude towards them?
I don't really have a massive issue with that. I can see where people are coming from. I can see when Bagnaia himself is coming from, as he did say earlier in the weekend that now is the time to accept that this bike isn't quite the bike I want. Necessarily doesn't quite give me what I want, but I just have to accept it and knuckle down and get down to it. And we shouldn't discuss going back to any sort of 2024 version because that's not on the table and that will not happen when Marc is performing the way he is. I will say that there is a handy bellwether within the Ducati camp that is not Marc, that is Fabio Di Gianantonio, who also seems to be finding whatever is new on the 2025, and that's still a little nebulous, especially as, some of it seems to be getting swapped out from weekend to weekend necessarily. It's seemingly just primarily a question of internals. There was a suggestion during the French Grand Prix weekend when Ducati manager Davide Cardosi spoke to MotoGP, the world feed. He did sort of indicate that the 2025 engine is more different than what we thought. I should say the 2025 engine that they're racing right now, not the 2025 engine that was rejected in the preseason. But I think we kind of knew that already, that there was still some refinements made, some smaller tweaks to the so there's the newest spec was rejected, but then when they homologated the older spec, it was still not quite identical to what the hand-me-down bikes are racing. At least that's my best guess theory and understanding as to what's going on. And whether that's the part that's giving Bagnaia trouble, it's really just complicated to say right now. What we do know is that both Bagnaia and Di Giannantonio, especially the past handful of weekends, have been talking about front confidence on braking, that Bagnaia feels that the front can go from any weekend, that his sort of rhetoric on what's wrong with the bike for him has changed, because earlier in the season he was talking about, I think, a slightly earlier phase of braking and a controlled rear slide, and now he's just, it's the final coming into the corner, rushing the corner, attacking the corner part of it. I think that as long as he's seeing the gap to Marc on the data that he's seeing, as long as he's seeing some gap to the 24s, it's natural to be scrambling with the bike spec. I understand that compulsion. And I would also say that people criticize him for maybe trying to work his way around it rather than just riding the thing. But the stated aim for Pecco Bagnaia this season, and it's an aim that doesn't look great right now, but that's the target, is to win the championship.
Yeah.
Does it matter if he's 51 points behind, 41 points behind, 31 points behind? If this is if he just rides this bike, just cracks on, he's toast. He knows it. He sees it. So it's worth exploring all the options to see if he can somehow steal a march on Marc through work with his crew chief, Christian Gabarini, through sort of unorthodox solutions, through something like that, because clearly as the bike is right now, just riding it the way he does, the gulf is too big. I don't think you can just reduce it by just cracking down and working.
Well, no, especially because, as Pecco's acknowledged, Marc's core skill set is ride the wheels off something that doesn't quite work. And that is not Pecco's core skill set. I would say Pecco's core skill set is when the bike is... this is going to sound like I'm being one of those people who goes, he only wins on a dominant bike. I don't think that's true. But when the bike is where he wants it, he's incredibly fast. Whether he's as fast as Marc on a bike that Marc also likes, I'm now not feeling that necessarily. But he's, like you say, he's not gonna out manhandle a bike that's not right compared to Marc. So I get the chipping away at stuff. I also I don't know what the way out of this is, but the more I hear from Bagnaia this season, the more confused, downbeat, concerned he sounds. Like he's not getting... you don't get chance in a MotoGP weekend in the mid-2020s to do huge radical changes, or even like lots and lots of iterative stuff, because you've only got one session and a bit really where you can play around before you've got to be fast, otherwise your weekend's screwed. So, and also this whole kind of narrative about what the bike spec is, we said a lot at the start of the season about the 2025 bike being in the bin and stuff, but how many times over the last few years have riders gone, it's not like a 24 and a 25 or a 23 and a 24, it's constant, and it's just how far along the kind of map of from 24 to 25 a bike ends up in terms of which bits they use and which they don't. So I do get this is a new bike. Otherwise, Digia, who's had a really strong couple of seasons, wouldn't be looking as woeful as he's been looking at a few rounds recently. So yeah, there's obviously a puzzle to crack. I understand, like you, Val, why Pecco's trying to crack it rather than just going, just rag the bike harder and somehow it will work. But going about it in that sort of methodical, try to improve things way means I just feel like he's up for another run of 2 or 3 defeats before he even remotely looks like he's going to get on top of things. Even with some kind of Pecco-friendly tracks coming up. We used to talk about Pecco-friendly tracks. He just keeps getting beaten at them.
Yeah.
Now.
I mean, the big one was Qatar, and he was closer in Qatar than any other venue so far this season. So I think Jerez, Le Mans, everywhere. I mean, he just, in terms of the pure pace, is getting beat pretty noticeably. Even the big worry for me in Bagnaia's season is we've had some Fridays where he's actually, Bagnaia's template weekend is you run like 8th fastest on Friday.
If and that sometimes.
And then you do some work overnight, and on Saturday you're already pretty good, but maybe the sprint isn't quite right, and then on Sunday you're just super quick. And we've seen Pecco start quite decent on Friday and then just not find any more meaningful ground towards Marc for one reason or another. That's the way it's felt. That sort of the gap has been consistent. I think the qualifying metrics they're bad. They're particularly bad. They're really bad, because I think that's the part of the preseason prediction, and that's the part that I'm surprised with, and that's the part where I feel I've really whiffed, is if you told me after 6 rounds, estimate the Marc versus Pecco, like qualifying head-to-head, I'd say 3-3. I'd be like, 3-3 feels reasonable. There's going to be some tracks where Marc does it, but also Pecco has become a very, very impressive qualifier on this bike, consistently rivaling Jorge Martin, who is widely regarded as one of the best single lap operators in MotoGP.
Yeah, totally.
Last year, between Pecco and Enea, who is obviously, again, Enea Bastianini is not a good MotoGP qualifier. There's a lot to like about him. That's not one thing. That's not an Enea Bastianini strength. But the head-to-head was something like ridiculous, like 18-3 or 19-2 or something. He just ran him up round after round. And right now, it's 0-6 for Bagnaia versus Marquez. And it's a representative 0-6. It's a legit 0-6. It maybe could have been 1-5. He didn't crash in Qatar or something. But for me, that 0-6 tells the story of the season so far. And if you can't, the problem is with this iteration of Marc, if you can't get to him over one lap, I don't know what you're supposed to do over a race distance. No.
Yeah, completely.
Oh, that's, again, we're getting to a situation where it's easy to talk about what Bagnaia should be doing, how he should be approaching weekends, what his, philosophy should be, maybe like feel like he's underexploiting the bike that's under him. But for instance, I do believe that the current GP25 is not a meaningful upgrade on the 24. I don't think it is. I would not be surprised if it's a little slower right now, just on the evidence of the riders that we have, totality. But the part that matters is the Pecco gap to Marc, and it's too big to do anything about. So you might as well take big swings, because you're not going to win this in a normal straight fight. You have to scramble.
Yeah, like you say, Pecco's only hope of being as fast as Marc, if that, is get a bike he likes. So he's got to do what he can to do that. You mentioned Bastianini, which I think is a really good point. This season, to an extent, is making me rethink what I thought about Bagnaia in the past, and it's definitely making me think a lot about what the future would hold for him. This is a guy who's won 2 world championships in MotoGP, could have won 4 with a tidier, well, 2 tidier seasons, 2021 and 2024. He completely, I would say, across their time at Ducati, demolished Bastianini, who, okay, not having a great start to life at Tech 3 KTM, but over the course of his career, Bastianini is a very good rider. Pecco saw off Jack Miller at Ducati, who I was certainly convinced out of those two at the start, Miller was going to emerge as the new Ducati team leader. And you saw more in Bagnaia earlier. You were more sharper on his rise than I was, I would say. But Pecco basically made Jack his number 2 pretty quickly in the works team. Everything is, he's seen off some really good people, I would say. Do we have to question where he actually stands a bit now he's up against Marc? Or a few times people have used the kind of Danny Pedrosa comparison, just that we're seeing he's in the Danny Pedrosa mode, and you still thought of Danny Pedrosa as one of the 4 aliens in that era.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard for me to draw a Danny Pedrosa comparison, because I did not cover the peak years of Danny Pedrosa in MotoGP, and from what I heard of them, you would almost maybe say that Danny Pedrosa should be a step above. But again, I just don't have enough of a picture of Danny Pedrosa's career. But you feel like the difference between Danny Pedrosa, potential 2-time champion, and Pecco Bagnaia, actual 2-time champion, is the circumstances of the competition. I think that's fair to say. I don't think that's necessarily, it's denigrating Bagnaia a little bit, but we have to be also, honest with ourselves. That Ducati was a really good bike. There were a lot of good riders on it, but none of them at the level of, peak Marc Marquez, peak Jorge Lorenzo, etc. Or at least that's my feeling. I don't really know. We can't really compare cross eras. It's not ideal. There's a lot that Pecco was doing really, really well. He's a very good rider. Again, you brought up the 2 teammates that he saw off. It's not just them. It's that within the Ducati camp, he always had his very clear trademark strengths, and he should be closer than this on a bike that he feels better with. I do think that's probably true. I don't know if he should be closer enough to where it meaningfully matters, but he should be closer. But again, it's just, I think we turn really easily on riders, not you specifically. I mean, generally, right?
The world.
I'm pretty sure I will have said on this podcast, you mentioned he could have been a 4-time champion. I don't think that would have been reflective. No, I don't think that would have been fair. You don't have to be the best rider of the year, the most talented rider of the era, to win 1-2 titles. You just have to put yourself in the right position and work well with what you have, and help the manufacturer around you be stronger. And I'm sure Bagnaia has hugely contributed to Ducati becoming the juggernaut that it is right now. But now a rider who the current evidence is just a tier above has come in and the party ends. It's like all of this sounds really harsh. And I don't know whether maybe I'm in denial, refusing to acknowledge to myself that this is actually a really harsh thing to say. But I just think that's part of the game. You know, there's guys you can't really touch, and if there's somebody on the MotoGP grid right now who I think could touch Marc, again, Marc, who has never ever been beaten by a MotoGP teammate.
True.
Never.
Yeah.
The only season where it's been like maybe you could make the case that he was the slower of the two riders in the team was his initial 2013 season against Dani Pedrosa as a child. As a literal child, maybe there's an argument. As a literal child against one of the best riders of that era, maybe.
Yeah.
The rest, you look at...
And he still won the championship.
And he still won the championship, yeah. You look at the whole available evidence. None of those guys can touch him. Never. Ever. Maybe like one-off weekends, etc. And it's only gotten worse and worse and worse and worse, even as he broke his arm. Obviously, in 2019, before that, he annihilated the poor Jorge Lorenzo in Lorenzo's final season. But even after the arm break, not really.
No.
You can't get him. He just maybe got a bit worse at qualifying, maybe a little bit. You know what I mean, right? It's
totally
should not be unusual. There's a lot of really, really good riders who went up against him and had to basically had their careers ruined.
Well, that is where I think we need to go next. Like, we're not expecting any change in the Ducati lineup right now.
You don't think Alex Marquez is going to replace him?
Well, genuinely, a few of the members on Patreon have said, would they be doing better with Alex on the second bike even? There's a guy we're going to talk about who Alex's teammates right now, who we're going to talk about in a second on this podcast. But for Pecco's own sanity as much as anything, and assuming Marc wants to carry on, he's a long way into his career now. They're both contracted on through this season and next season. It's only May 2025, but do you see? Surely Bagnaia is going to be wanting to not be put through this after his contract ends and to be somewhere other than Marc Marquez's teammate.
So that's a good question. I think that part of it is a lot more interesting than the other consideration. The consideration that Ducati could be doing better with a different second rider in its lineup. I would just like to put doing better in the context. The second rider is third in the championship.
Yeah.
He is, I would imagine, going to finish this season second. That's still my expectation. I'm not going to say you can live with that, because that's not even true. That's just fine. You want that. That's in fact, that's probably a better outcome than your two guys being 3 points apart. You maybe want that less than this alternative. He is not riding at a level that's unsustainable. That's you have to get rid of this guy immediately. He's not producing at all. He's 15th, 16th, 17th. He's scoring 2 points per weekend while his teammate is winning, which we've seen in recent MotoGP many times. This is not that. There is, on Ducati's side, it would be genuinely insane, and it's not happening, to consider any sort of move for Alex Marquez or anything like that. I mean, look, famous last words, weird stuff happens, but I'm very comfortable with it. No, Ducati's not pushing out Pecco Bagnaia, the rider that everybody in that top brass loves, the rider who brought it to championships after this long wait. That's also, it would be a terrible thing to do morale-wise. It would be a nasty thing to do to Bagnaia. It would also be a terrible thing to do to any other prospective riders. You can win a few titles for us, and then we'll just flick you at the first speed bump. Not going to happen. But I think the Bagnaia point is relevant, and it is interesting. The counter is, but there's no, are you going to build your own bike? There's no. There's nothing else you can do. You stay.
Yeah, okay. I do see that. I mean, obviously 2027, different set of rules, whole different universe, but in some ways. Your point about you wouldn't get rid of Bagnaia on the job he's doing because he's close enough, he's going to be second in the championship. I think I agree to the point that even if another manufacturer was on Ducati's level right now, I think the gap is still okay. It's not like Pecco would be letting the team down in a close title fight where Marc needs more support. It's crazy to think we're talking in slightly number 2-esque terms about potential 4-time world champion Pecco Bagnaia, but we are. And I don't have any qualms about that right now. But I think the gap is close enough that Bagnaia is not letting too many bikes between them, even if, say, a Yamaha or remember Aprilia? Remember them? If one of them was... No, I don't know either right now. Sorry, Aprilia, because that actually pains me to say. Even if one of those teams was closer, Pecco is still close enough to Marc that we're not going, oh my gosh, he's been pushed back to 6th or 7th when his teammate wins the championship. So that's okay. But yeah, I think this is more on Bagnaia either has to go, okay, I know I'm not quite Marc Marquez. I just need to be the best Pecco Bagnaia I can be, and that will probably be second in the championship at best. That's all right. I'll stick with this for however many years Marc wants to stick around in this team. Or, and I kind of hope he does this one, he goes, actually, legacy-wise, because he's talked a lot about his legacy and how he judges himself almost, and how he proves to himself he's actually the sort of great he wants to be. If he looks at it and goes, okay, I can't prove that I'm better than Marc Marquez, that's the conclusion here. But I could prove something by winning on a different bike and getting out of the Ducati system. I can imagine him being more tempted to try that than to go, here is my place in Marc's shadow. I'm going to stay there.
You know, this is part of the reason why I've always wanted to do a draft podcast, and you've always told me no. But because the fun part of that, and the part that exposes is there's questions like, imagine it's the 2027 silly season in early 2026, and everybody who you expect hits free agency, but so does Pecco Bagnaia. Who does he go over? Who does he leapfrog in the list of teams' interests? And I think the answer to that question is impossible.
Yeah, definitely.
Right now. There's a few ones I feel good about. Fabio or Pecco. Fabio Quartararo, easy. Pedro Acosta or Pecco. There, I'm already a little bit.
Yeah,
I don't know, but because of the youth, maybe you would say Pedro. But then you start going lower down the list. Surely he's next, right? But what if somehow, let's say, Jorge Martin is contractually free? He's not going to be, I suspect. But we'll I guess we'll get to that in a second. That's the interesting part. I don't really know what this season does to his standing as an attractive option for the non-Ducati. Also, because there's no proof of concept of him working outside of Ducati. For me, that's a really, really, really interesting question. But at the same time, I think that if MotoGP teams do feel very strongly different about Bagnaia and his value this season compared to last season, I think that's bad process, because I think you always had to have this idea in mind that it was quite likely that if a total monster like Marc Marquez comes into that team, then the fun times end. I think we all had to consider that as a high probability outcome. Maybe Bagnaia is struggling a bit more than you would expect it, again, as I said earlier, but there's always a lot of flavor of the month going on in MotoGP, and that's sort of the part that I don't necessarily always agree with.
If Bagnaia does end up being moved out of or leaving the factory Ducati ranks after 2026, there's a few people, including Maurice Henry in the Members Club, who raised this point after Le Mans, who are wondering about the timeline for Fermin Aldeguer being moved into the factory team instead. Val, for approximately 18 months, we've just basically shut you up on the podcast when you've been prepared to bang on about Fermin Aldeguer. He's actually having a really good MotoGP rookie season, headlines now by those 2 podiums at Le Mans. Before we get into what he's doing right now, because I've shut you up for 18 months in talking about Aldeguer, for listeners who don't follow sub-MotoGP stuff and the ladder, give us a quick summary of, one, why the universe got so quickly so excited about Aldeguer, and then why we all thought, wow, Ducati's moved way too quick committing to this guy, except probably you, who always had faith.
Yeah, so Aldeguer's pre-MotoGP career, again, the very important thing is he's very, 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 very young. He's the youngest rider in MotoGP. He's a year younger than Pedro Acosta, and 4 years younger than anybody else. I don't actually remember if he's 19 or 20. I think he's
Let me check.
Early 20.
You monologue,
yeah.
I'll look.
Yeah. But basically...
He's 20.
That makes sense. There were brief flashes when he was even younger than that in Moto2. Then finally he strung together in Moto2 while on a different bike to most of the other frontrunners, the speed-up Oscar bike. He strung together a genuinely phenomenal late season run of races in 2023 that was just, while Pedro Costa was sort of in championship celebration, it's fine, I'm preparing for the KTM mode. Aldeguer was just ripping it up session after session, was winning races that even when something went wrong, just had so much in hand that he was absolutely dominating. And there's always a question of how much the bike's specificity relative to the bike most front runners use, which was the Calyx, was flattering him, and how much it was his own raw talent, how much of it his own peak form. In 2024, he went into the season as the favorite, but the Boscoscuro speed up ranks expanded. There was a new team added to it, and that new team, MT Helmets MSI, had Ayagura. Ayagura dominated the championship instead. Aldeguer had a very patchy one with the switch also to Pirelli tires from Dunlops in Moto2. He seemed to have a bit of trouble with that in some weekends. He had some really good ones, but he also had some really naff ones. He made some really big mistakes. It just felt like, for as much as I don't love that type of analysis, but I think in this case, when you're talking about like a 13-year-old or whatever, it is actually warranted. I think he really buckled under the pressure. It really, like, being the presumed Moto2 champion and coming in and realizing that a lot has changed and a lot needed adapting to, and that it wasn't coming easy every week. And I think it really got to him. So wasn't a particularly great season, but by then, like even by the season opener, I think he already probably had a Ducati deal on the table. There's a lot of conversation about whether Ducati had moved too quickly to sign Aldeguer. It's a conversation I've consistently pushed back against because, one, I did not see whether Aldeguer's MotoGP viability is going to be meaningfully changed by more Moto2 seasons. And two, the fact that I felt Ducati was just a very good environment to take a punt on a high upside rider and try to develop him in the best possible circumstances. And I gotta say, early in 2025, it looked a bit like touch and go, because he didn't hit the ground running necessarily the first 2 weekends, the preseason. He was okay, but he wasn't anything special, especially what we knew about the bike. He was a very clear sixth Ducati, caught adrift, was sort of doing okay learning the ropes, injured Miguel Oliveira, so thanks for that. It was sort of, again, it didn't make the decision feel wrong to me, but it did make me feel like, okay, but maybe it just will not happen. Maybe, or at least it will not happen to the extent to where it's really fully worth it for Ducati, which is in a position where it needs the next guy, ideally. And then ever since, he's been very good. He's been very, very good. There's still, there's caveats to it. I mean, clearly the bike's fantastic. He's still 0-6 against Alex Marquez in qualifying. He was very close at Le Mans finally, and he's been close a couple of times, but generally we have to compare him to the guys on the same bike, and he's still, especially in qualifying, it's just a little bit off. In race pace, he has been phenomenal. Yeah. He's been fantastic. It's like he's genuinely like really, really hit the groove. Just suddenly seems to come very, very natural for him. I think he still struggles when there's other bikes around, not in terms of like really, really bad, but just struggles to maximize those races. But when they have him running in clean air late in the race on used tires, that's the moment Gigi Dall'Igna can point to the timing screen and go, "Told you so, knew it." And the early evidence on that is totally sufficient for me already to say Ducati has won this one. This is clearly a successful punt. But again, a very important part of that is this is a manufacturer uniquely well positioned to succeed on this one. I think there's a lot of riders, although maybe not a lot with the peak talent of Aldeguer, but a lot of riders who you could also put on a Ducati right now in MotoGP, and they would do a job for you. And that job would make a lot of people go, "Well, I didn't know that guy had it in him." Well, yeah, of course you didn't. He was never on a Ducati, so...
Yeah, now the caveat to how impressive Aldeguer is looking is that traditionally, a rookie getting a year-old bike that has done very well in the previous season and is well sorted is your golden ticket to having a great rookie season. Add a team like Gresini that does great things with young riders, great things as an underdog when no one's necessarily looking their way as well. And crew chief in Frankie Carcetti, who's good at dealing with things like this in these situations and really helping riders turn things around and progress. Although it's an ideal set of circumstances to come into MotoGP. But there's so many things about like the race pace. Actually, mentioned like not looking so good with bikes around him sometimes, but the racecraft against Quartararo late on in the Le Mans Sprint, the racecraft with Acosta late on in the Le Mans Grand Prix, that's really stood out to me as well. He can properly handle himself, which I'm not surprised by, but he's shown he's got that element at MotoGP level too.
My God, he's so good in the wet and so good on low grip. And that's also very, like, that tells you something. That tells you about the innate level of confidence that's already available there, and it tells you of the peak talent there. Like, usually those are like, it's specifically the part in the French Grand Prix that made me go, oh, he might be better than I thought, was so those sort of tetchy laps when the rain just started coming down, but the track wasn't fully wetted yet, and you could still stay out on slicks. And suddenly you see Marc and Alex tiptoeing around. Marc and Alex, two of the best in MotoGP at this kind of stuff. And obviously they have championship considerations in there, and they're coming to those bits ahead. And then behind him, Aldeguer just full speed to the point where he was so strong in that part of the race, it kind of ruined his Grand Prix a little bit. If he was a little bit worse, he follows them into the pits. He doesn't lose the seconds that he loses to staying out on the track for another lap. But that was the part that I think was most encouraging. There's been a lot of really encouraging stuff. That's the Ducati privilege. You're gonna have moments, but Fermin's had moments. I say that this is the perfect environment because the bike will get you most of the way there. But still, if you're finishing 14th, 15th every weekend or whatever, people will notice and they'll say, not quite. Whereas it sometimes worked the other way. Like Ayogura finished 10th or whatever at the French Grand Prix. I think it was his first like bad weekend at MotoGP. People aren't really going to notice. He's going to be afforded that. But when you're sixth of 6 Ducatis and you're cut adrift, like Fabio Di Giannantonio was at Le Mans, then suddenly there is a bit of pressure. Even if you're a rookie like Aldeguer, there would be a bit of pressure. But it's still a more envious circumstance than a lot of the alternatives, I would say.
Yeah, totally. I also think, there's been some mistakes. It was, yet again, Oliveira coming off on the wrong side of someone else's mistake was really sad. There've been crashes. The Le Mans qualifying crash that didn't cost him as much as it could have done, for instance. He's been relatively, though, for a very young rookie, relatively mistake-free. The early races being a little bit muted seemed to fit quite a sensible pattern as well. He didn't seem to be panicking about where he was pace-wise. He was just working his way forward. I remember during testing, Simon came back to us a few times and said that it had kind of paddock chats with Carcetti, where Carcetti had mentioned certain lap times that he reckoned Aldeguer would get around to doing as the test progressed, or a particular race stint to watch. It didn't quite come together in testing to the extent that was tipped, but there were these little flashes that it was definitely going to, and he's not overreached for those necessarily. Now, we're still very early in the season. Pedro Acosta went kind of crash crazy a little bit later than this last year, didn't he? So I'm about to make a load of ridiculously stupid comments that will come back to haunt me in 3 months' time if this pattern doesn't continue. If what he's done for the last couple of weekends continues, then I think Aldeguer is as likely as anybody who isn't Marc Marquez to win a Grand Prix this year. I think Aldeguer is a no-brainer for Ducati to pick for its next factory rider in whatever seat it needs. And I think the future of MotoGP with Aldeguer versus Acosta, who hate each other, looks really, really fun.
Do they hate each other? Or like, I genuinely don't know the
Simon reckons they hate each other. Has Simon ever overplayed anything?
No. I think it's a very big if.
Yeah.
I think all of those statements I'm genuinely totally happy with. I think Aldeguer could make it complicated for 2027 in terms of the decision on the table. But again, I think there will be a rapport there and an understanding there, like a common understanding to where he might accept that it's the best for him to have Ducati play out the next step of his career exactly how it wants to. Because again, Gigi Dall'Igna took a punt on him. Gigi Dall'Igna has put him in an environment where the pressure seems minimized. Where again, like, remember the preseason, or was it the postseason or whatever, one of the tests, etc. And I went up to Dall'Igna and asked him about the Aldeguer Moto2 season, and his answer was, "We're not worried at all. He's going to be fine, and we'll give him time to do what he needs to do." And clearly, that's 100% the philosophy of Ducati, that they understood that the biggest obstacle to this, not a teenager anymore, but still pretty close, succeeding within our lineup is just trying to just doing something that doesn't allow him to mentally flourish. And clearly they've understood the mission there completely. I think he now, nobody owes anybody anything, but he now owes them a bit of trust, or at least should believe that they have the best interests of developing him in mind. That might change if there's suddenly a play for Pedro Acosta taking place at some point, or anything of the sort. But right now, this is a very symbiotic, mutually agreeable partnership. And I also, the Grand Prix win this season thing, I also felt it. It's specifically, again, at Le Mans, with the wet pace, with the sort of damp track pace, but also with a lot of the late race stuff that has been, he seems to handle those tires very, very well. Again, this is not a stick to, I'm not using this as a stick to beat another rider with. Don't particularly want to do that. That's not part of it. Riders have strengths and weaknesses, and that's fine. Remember, that's fine. That's okay. Yep. That's part of the game. But Franco Morbidelli cannot do the longevity, the stint longevity, the tire preservation, the way Fermin Aldeguer already can do. I'm convinced of that. So I think I'm very, 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 very optimistic suddenly, even most. Whereas before, again, the Aldeguer fan thing is a joke going on. I just felt a very strong pushback to people going, "Oh, it makes no sense. He should stay in Moto2 for another season." Why? What does that accomplish? Well, okay, it accomplishes a cleaner bill of health for Miguel Oliveira. That's worth something. That's fair. But
no, it doesn't, because someone else would have taken Oliveira out.
That's true.
By now. Enough races have passed.
Yeah.
Couple of quite big news stories kind of going to develop / conclude in the week ahead at the around the time of the British Grand Prix. One of them, which won't conclude, but we'll learn a lot more, I think, is the Jorge Martin trying to exit Aprilia element. So, Val, you and Simon did a urgent podcast last week with Simon hiding in some kind of airport warehouse to get it done when the news broke that Jorge Martin was trying to trigger an exit clause to not stay at Aprilia pretty much any longer than he has to. We're a week on, a bit of dust has settled. We're still waiting for a bit more information, which hopefully will come out over this week, a bit more of the kind of Aprilia take on it, which we expect to get a lot more of that, if not before then when the paddock convenes at Silverstone later this week. But a week on, what are your thoughts on what happens next, and what we're sending Simon to ask and chase down in the paddock on Thursday?
Yeah, it's a complicated one, because it does depend on, obviously, Jorge Martin almost certainly will not be on site. There's no particular reason for him to be on site. There's very little to be gained from being grilled by the media in any way. Aprilia, it is really up to them how they play this, because there's no provable inciting incident to report to respond to. There's nothing this has happened out almost in the public, but not quite through the official channels. It's not like Jorge Martin has done an Oscar Piastri style. It has come to my attention, blah blah blah. I'm not riding for Aprilia next season in an Instagram statement or whatever. When you don't have that, you can always just say, it's an internal matter. We're dealing with it. I mean,
yeah, but of all the teams in this paddock who are going to not do that, because Aprilia and hopefully someone at Aprilia is listening and will live up to this, but I'm confident you will. Aprilia has its eyes open enough to go, the whole world's talking about this. We know it's been reported by journalists who would know from the right sources that this is the case. We've got to address this, and Massimo Rivola will. Obviously, there'll be legal considerations because it's all contract-based, but it's not like Aprilia is going to completely shut down every bit of conversation about this in the way that I think probably the other four teams actually might.
No, I agree, and it does keep them in the headlines to a certain extent in a season that otherwise there's not been a ton of reason for them to be in the headlines, apart from Ayagura, which again, Aprilia will rightly point out that's because the guy who we signed to carry the number one for us has been hurt in increasingly severe ways. There's one prediction that you can rubber stamp. It's going to be awkward. It's already awkward. It's going to be more awkward. it's going to get a little weird because already sort of a little bit of a he said, she said thing going on behind the scenes. There's like right now in various media reports, there's a discussion playing out over whether like the exact mechanism of what Martin went to Aprilia with and whether, there's going to be, I imagine, and again, this is based on reporting I've read rather than anything I've heard, but it's the scenario that makes the most sense to me. There will be a difference of interpretation in what Jorge Martin has come to Aprilia with. Because, again, the initial report was that Martin has informed Aprilia of his intention to leave, but Martin's camp will position that as, like, our contractual prerogative right now is to leave, and we want to give Aprilia more of a chance to make that not in our interest. And, because otherwise I would just be a rider using my contractual prerogative. Then again, there was also a suggestion that Aprilia is somehow forcing Martin to rule one way or another on that contractual option. And if that's the case, you can also understand from Aprilia, like, what do you mean you want to defer a contractual option for an exit? You haven't ridden our bike.
Yeah.
Can you at least give us 2026? This is not our fault at all. Can you, because again, I don't know what the option looks like. I think it's so important is what the option looks like. If the option is championship position, what's extra 6 races going to change? Nothing.
True. Yeah, true.
Nothing at all.
Yeah.
Less than nothing. If it's like Martin results, he's not going to come out fit. He's going to come out with a half a season worth of information and data versus the other riders. Even if he performs relatively well, he's not going to perform, I think, well for any like contractual thing they would have put in. I would be shocked. So it would just be then at Martin's camp's discretion as to what he does. There's this very, very strong suggestion consistently, and it makes total sense to me that Martin's exit plan is Honda and it's his preferred plan. And as we said on the pod earlier, if that's the case, that at least makes 100,000% sense to me. Like, I'm a lot firmer on that than Simon. I think that's just the correct thing to do if he can do it in the position that he's found himself in. It sucks because, like, we're talking. I like to see motorsport as a bit of, Game of Thrones. Sometimes anything goes. Anybody you break some agreement with or put in a difficult position, etc., it's fine because we're all here to win the championship for ourselves, and everybody else has to be means to an end. That's part of the suspension of disbelief we use, I think, when we watch motor racing. We have to feel that normal, not even business conduct, person-to-person conduct doesn't really apply.
Because everyone would do the same to everyone else effectively, because team or rider, you've got the same goal.
But also, like, that's not a way to live.
No.
Because you can also live that way. You can also say, well, other people would have also done that to me, so I do that to other people. Don't do that in your life. That's not good.
Good life advice. I don't think anyone listening to this podcast would.
We all need to, have each other's backs and, one planet, etc. Blah, blah, blah,
Yeah.
But in motor racing, not one planet. There's me, and then there's whatever. And in that sense, if Jorge Martin is maneuvering to Honda, all the power to him. I think that's the correct thing to do. But we're still going to hear more details on whether that's actually the case, on who's contractually in the right or wrong, on what Aprilia can do. The one thing is, I think, again, I said this on the post night, on the previous pod, and I'll say it again. This thing is toast. It's so done. It's bad.
We should actually, on that point, before we move on to the other bit of news we want to address, a few people in the members club did go, hang on, Val, what about Alex Palou in IndyCar? And this is probably the first and only diversion into IndyCar in the Race MotoGP podcast. But to cut a very long story short, Alex Palou, best driver in IndyCar, about to win a billionth title. A couple of years ago, he tried to exit his Ganassi team from McLaren and then changed his mind and decided to stay at Ganassi. 2 years on from that row. It's not even resolved fully in court yet.
Yeah.
But Ganassi and Palou still very happy to work together and racking up more titles. So the fact that he wanted to leave for a rival who Ganassi has a really bad relationship with has kind of been just brushed under the carpet and then moving on happily. You're adamant that is basically unique, and it will not happen with Martin and Aprilia.
Well, first of all, I should say that's a multi-step route. That's insane. Like, if anybody in this podcast is interested, just Google some of it. It's
long.
Wow.
Our colleague Jack Benyon is still picking through court documents every couple of weeks as more things emerge around it. There's so many elements to that are ridiculous in terms of. I'm not going to get into it now. It's a great story. Anyway,
Jack will attest to the fact that I might have used the words Alex Palou, the hero of the proletariat, a couple of times in in Slack documents, and I do that without being in any way sure or convinced or knowing whether he's legally in the right or not. That's just so. The thing with what's different with the Martin situation is Alex Palou's interest in defecting from Ganassi never had anything to do with the quality of the Ganassi package. And it's also a big reason of why he stayed is, he wanted to flirt with a Formula One possibility a little bit. Clearly financial considerations were playing a part, but for him, a Formula One future was worth potentially a slight downgrade in IndyCar machinery. Basically, there's no such consideration here for Jorge Martin. The end all and be all is a strong MotoGP program, and a move to leave Aprilia right now is a message not of just like I want to do something else, or I'm there to do what's best for me, etc. It's a message that you cannot brush away. There's nothing you can do. It's a message of I think someone else is better for me, and in the sense that not just better for me is better. I think you guys cannot take me to where I want to be, and that's heart destroying. I don't understand how you can repair that. I do not believe that you guys can take me there. And then how are you supposed to show up every weekend for whatever 18 months, 6 months, whatever, and give your best, your everything? How are the people back at the factory supposed to develop you new carbon swing arms, etc., when they know you don't think they can take you there? I think that's the part that's part of it that's impossible to repair. The other part is Aprilia will feel that it's done everything right in terms of handling Martin's injury and absence. I mean, there's nothing else it could have really done. It's not like it's going to say no, he needs to ride with the broken ribs, etc., or he needs to be back as soon as possible. But Aprilia will feel that it's had relatively grand plans for this 2-year cycle and the start of the season, and now it's already having to pick up the pieces because of how hurt Jorge Martin has been, and now he doesn't want to be here. That's it's a deep betrayal in it should be in their eyes, but also, again, as we've said earlier, in Jorge Martin's eyes, if he doesn't think Aprilia can take him where he needs to be, then you don't just, but I'll just hang around for 2 years because I owe him that, even if I don't think there's anything in it for me. Well, every MotoGP career, there's a limited amount of seasons you can go for what you need to go. If Jorge Martin thinks that this move is more likely to make him champion again in the future, and we're saying this as if it's certainly Honda, but whatever he's doing, he will be certain that the chances are greater of being MotoGP champion again down the line with that than with this. That's, you get it. I think you have to understand it on a certain level.
Well, also, like your kind of philosophical line about how in MotoGP, motorsport in general, everyone has to do the thing that's right for them and everyone else gets that. That applies from Aprilia's side as well. So they have every right to kind of look at Jorge Martin and go, why don't you believe in us? Look what we've come from. Look what, sure. Bez keeps throwing our bike through the gravel on lap 3 of every race right now, but look what this rookie's doing on this bike. Look what we've done with the resources we've had. How dare you? And so they're entitled to think that, just as Absolutely. Martin is entitled to think, what's going on here? I need to be on something better. Speaking of teams that Martin and his management have insulted over the years, KTM has another big week coming up. Quickly, Val, just kind of we can't get into this in too much detail until the deadline is hit and we know one way or the other. But why is it? Just quickly explain to listeners why this is a big week for KTM again, and what we know about how it's looking.
Yeah, so when KTM was saved earlier in the season, saved as, a company with a future that was still conditional on it finding like 600 million worth of funding, which, is still not exactly. It's less than the debts were considerably. Yep. It's, much less, but it's still not something that you can just ruffle around in your couch and be like, oh, I found that under the pillow. We just need another another 600 million. And it that process from like the various bits and bobs that were coming out about it did not sound like it was going super smoothly or super easily. Like none of the reporting has been particularly like rose tinted, and there was another production stoppage because of a supply chain situation. And just, it always, I think, sounded like it was going to get over the hump, but that it wasn't maybe as smooth as we may have made it originally sound. And a lot of the reporting at the time might have originally sound. Now, the deadline for, I think, securing the funds or presenting the funds or whatever is later this week. It'll be, I tried to open the calendar, but I cannot, and I cannot count 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, Friday. Wow. Good.
Got there.
Yeah, look, I think it's very important that all of our listeners know that they're entrusting their MotoGP opinion getting to a guy who cannot count. That's cool.
You just proved you can.
That's fine. That's true. Take that, primary school teachers. I'm kidding. I was very good in primary school. Anyway, this is a catastrophe, as always. Anyway,
Simon was here.
What was I saying? Anyway, that's the deadline to confirm the funds, and the reporting is that KTM's Indian long-term partner Bajaj Auto has taken out a loan. They've taken out a bunch of loans, basically with the intention of investing the loans that seem to correspond to what it's going to have to invest into KTM for KTM to hit the targets that it needs to hit. So we need to know the details of how that is going to work, to know what that then means for the MotoGP program, because there have been talks of potentially the entries being sold to someone else. I presume there would also have to be a conversation about the race team being sold to somebody else. There is obviously always every possibility that Bajaj will look at it and will say, no, actually, we want to stay in MotoGP. So let's get the show underway again as a crucial component of marketing. So some things have changed, but not a lot has changed on the surface just yet. And if KTM has a new majority owner, has a new people calling the shots as a result of this, then it'll be up to them to then publicly say, as again, not a priority, because there's a very big business with thousands of employees to sort out and to assure of their future, to strategize for. But as part of it, what happens to KTM's works rider fleet, and specifically its MotoGP program, which again currently employs, in addition to all the bike R&D and stuff like that, and the bikes that you're having to supply, and all the mass dampers and whatever, and all the infinite 5 million different specs of bikes that you're wheeling out there every weekend. In addition to that, you have 4 quite high profile riders on 2-year contracts. And you might want to develop a 2027 bike or not.
Yeah. Quite a few repercussions, aren't there, to say the least. We'll find out more about that this weekend. There's going to be a lot going on at the British Grand Prix. We'll find out more about the British Grand Prix itself, and I'm really hoping to see some people in the grandstand in the background of the footage, but I'm a little bit concerned after recent years on that front. Simon will have some company in the paddock at Silverstone. Megan is heading there, and Ollie as well, a roving reporter, and kind of looking into the fan experience at the British Grand Prix and how it compares to other events and what its future looks like. So it'll be a big part of their kind of jobs list for the weekend, as well as Aprilia Martin fallout, KTM deadline fallout, and this little battle of Marquez versus Bagnaia versus the other Marquez on track as well. So Val and I will kind of potentially leave a lot of next week's coverage in video and podcast form to the kind of trio at Silverstone, Simon, Megan and Ollie. But yeah, me and Val are quite opinionated as well, so we might shove ourselves in a little bit. We'll some of us will be back in your ears after Silverstone next weekend to let you know what's happened on track and all the things that are going to be happening off it as well.